remember the nursery rhyme, There's a Hole in My Bucket? It was one of my dad's absolute favourites, and he could recite it. And it started with, there's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, there's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, a hole. Then mend it, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry, then mend it, dear Henry, mend it. With what shall I mend it, dear Liza, with what shall I mend it, dear Liza, with what? And if you remember the rest of the nursery rhyme, Liza and Henry go through a whole variety of strategies to fix the hole in the bucket. And they come up with the conclusion that what is required is a bucket with no holes. I've included the lyrics to the entire poem, should you wish to remember it, in the collective. Being a leader in education at the moment feels a lot like you're holding a bucket full of holes. In fact, you're probably holding several buckets full of holes. And as soon as you plug the hole in one bucket, then another one springs open and you're attempting to plug holes and literally put your finger in the dike. And quite often we don't have the time or the brain space to be creating good solutions to problems. Even more annoying is the time wasting you get when people give you advice about how to fix your bucket that is not useful in the context that you're in. And we know that schools are more than complex, they are complicated. No, they're more than complicated, they are complex, and they're often chaotic, and they are staffed by imperfect humans whose role it is to develop the individual divergent young minds and ensure people's well-being and maintain focus on curriculum and comply with policy. And often my coaching clients present with problems that feel insurmountable and overwhelming. And many years ago, many years ago, I took some certification training called TMS, Team Management Systems, by Magirison and McCann. And again, I will give you some more information about TMS proper as we go through. But TMS have a little gem called a RIDO scale, R-I-D-O. And the tool was originally used for a completely different purpose than the one that I am going to use it for. They say in the workplace, there are 4 key issues that lie at the heart of what makes people want to work in different ways. And as I read these out, you'll hear that they sound a lot like DISC. And in fact, I think DISC is better. But let me tell you, they say at the heart of how people like to work is how people prefer to relate to others, and they talk about extroverts and introverts, how people like to gather information, how people prefer to make decisions, and how people prefer to organise themselves and others. So RIDO, R is for relationships, I is for information, D is for decisions, and O is for organisations. So as I said, I tend to prefer to use DISC instead of RIDO. It's just a little bit more robust. However, I use this scale a lot in coaching when people, at the goal setting phase, when people are presenting me with a challenge, or in fact, at any point when there's a very large insurmountable challenge. And while people are talking, I'm trying to listen for whether the goal is around a relationship. Is the goal or the challenge around information? Is it something around a decision that needs to be made? Or is there an organisational time management problem that needs addressing? As I said, I will include all of the information about proper TMS in the resources module, but I've discovered that the RIDO scale is an excellent way of working out what bucket your challenge needs to be in, and therefore what solution is going to meet your challenge the best. Of course, in real life, all of these buckets are really interconnected, and you can rarely tamper with one without impacting on the other. However, there is nothing sexier than a simple framework. So let's get started with R for relationships. This dimension is all about people. Is my challenge with a particular person? Is it with a cohort of teachers? Is it with the parent community in general, or a subset of the community? What's causing this relationship problem, and how might I best fix it? There are endless potential challenges with the humans we interact with on a daily basis, and these challenges are more likely to occur if we haven't taken the time, or if we haven't had the time to build and nurture trusting relationships. And just a little reminder that you can't change other people, you can only change yourself. So I'm going to ask these questions as if you're asking them of yourself. And when you're clear about these yourself, you can often positively influence others. So some of the questions that might be appropriate to ask if your bucket is a relationship problem, or trying to work out if it's a relationship problem, is, have I taken enough time to build a relationship with this person or group of people? Do I truly understand what's motivating them? Do I understand their strengths and their history and their style or the background? Do I understand their capabilities and their capacity? Do I listen with the intent to understand and empathize? As a leader, have I communicated clear expectations around how people are expected to work in order to be a good team member? So are people challenging me because I've not set good expectations around how they're expected to behave, but also what success might look like? Likewise, have I been clear about my own personal boundaries, and maybe someone's overstepped these and it's because I've not been clear or I've not picked them up on that? Do I know the professional boundaries of the people that I work with? Importantly, have I given people the resources that they need to do their job well? And sometimes the resources that they need are relationships with others. Have I given them coaching or mentoring, or what they need in order to do their job well? When relationships start to break down, what was my part in that? Was I too accommodating, too direct, unclear, avoidant? Where does my responsibility lie? Another question is, do I line manage or have direct responsibility for this person or team? If not, is this challenge actually best handled by somebody else, someone with a closer or a line management responsibility? The obvious question is, do I need to build or rebuild trust or psychological safety with this person or with these teams? Is the fact that I'm busy, stressed, or overwhelmed actually getting in the way of building and maintaining my relationships? This is emotional intelligence 101. Am I in a place where I'm emotionally intelligent, or perhaps I'm contributing to the problem? And have I given my team permission or skills to work with this challenge, fix this challenge on their own? Am I building capacity of others, or am I taking this challenge on my own? So there's some things to think about in terms of relationships. There's a million others, and I will include some resources next week that might help you. There's plenty of others already in the collective, because 90% of what I do is about building relationships and building trust. So you might want to go back to any of the modules on trust, on DISC, on strengths, and starting strong. Anything. We talk a lot about relationships in the collective. So the second point on the RIDO scale is information. And in this, I'm talking about information in its most general sense. So I would include knowledge and skills and materials and the experience of individuals and their understanding, as well as data under the information bucket. Information also asks us to consider micro and macro, so organisational versus strategic, small picture and big picture questions. And so probably best that I talk about an example. So maybe you're tasked with organising the Year 6 camp for the first time. And most of the challenges with this task will be informational in nature. I'm going to assume that you have the capacity to organise a camp, but you might not know what you don't know. And obviously, there'll be a lot of organisational requirements, and the challenge for the novice will be around finding and sorting through this information. And what we find as a novice, or the first time we've done something, you don't know what you don't know, and the smallest piece of information or knowledge that is missing can either get us stuck or send us off on the wrong direction. For example, back to the camp. You're organising the school camp, you're doing a great job, you've booked venues and you've done all sorts of things that you might, do, and you've booked buses and so forth. But you mightn't have realised that there's an entire camps and excursion policy. And so you may have failed to seek the right permissions, or you might not have given parents enough warning, or you might not have understood the requirements of staff to student ratios. Now, this is a teacher leader example, but I'm sure you're really familiar with day-to-day examples that are around the information. Have I got the information that I need? The good thing about repetitive tasks, so those tasks that might be complicated, but once we've worked them out, we can build systems around these, and you build on bits of information and you grow that, and it's all pretty straightforward. And gaining information and knowledge is cumulative, and it's helpful, and we can design processes that people can work through so that they don't have to go through the pain over and over. But the challenge comes with new people and new situations, and the fact that schools are not just complicated, that they are complex. So some questions you might need to ask yourself on a daily basis under the information heading is, do I have all the information that I need to solve this problem? And if not, where do I find it? Who has it? And am I brave enough to ask for help? If it's somebody that has it, is it a colleague, a parent, a superior? Where's that information kept? Is it in a portal? Is it in a policy? Is it in a handbook? Is it traditionally kept with a particular person in your setting? But it's not just information for you, obviously. Do my teaching staff, or my staff more generally, have really clear information and guidance about what's expected from them as teachers? Do they have curriculum guides and behaviour guides and whole school agreements and induction processes? Can they turn to a process that systematises that information that is cumulative so that they don't have to go and find it on their own? And importantly, do my early career teachers and new staff have access to timely support and coaching? So they might have access to induction, the cumulative knowledge, but do they have access to coaching that's going to help them thrive in a complex situation? It's okay to have the information, but am I communicating clearly and effectively, both operational and strategic messages? And we'll probably talk a bit more about that in organisation, but am I getting this information across, and am I using the best channels? Are there clear flowcharts for who's responsible for what and how information gets disseminated or stored? Am I operating on gut feeling, emotion, or evidence? Sometimes one is absolutely okay, but is evidence informing our gut feeling? Which is more comfortable for you? You will have a preference. Remember that emotions are data too. We just need to work out what it is that they're telling us. Emotions aren't facts, but they're giving us really good information about what's going on. And if we get an emotional response, is there evidence to suggest that this opinion or this idea or this information is correct? And if so, do I have a process for working that out? Am I getting the communication balance right? Is there just enough information but not overwhelming and confusing? Am I making sure that I understand people's communication preferences? And lastly, I want you to consider feedback as information. Feedback is the best information we have as humans to grow and develop. So am I giving good, robust feedback to my team about what's working and what's getting in the way? And how can I gather feedback on my own performance? Am I doing okay? Am I communicating effectively? Am I sharing well? Am I clear about what's important? And again, I will give you some ideas in the tools about how you might do that, but there is also some throughout the portal. D for decisions. It's believed that primary school teachers make 1,500 decisions in a day and school leaders roughly 300. We've all been teachers. We know that we are literally making decisions every single moment. And I do remember going home as an early career teacher and saying to my flatmate, I'm absolutely exhausted. As a special needs teacher, I had literally decided if people were hungry, thirsty, needed to go to the toilet, whether or not they needed to take their jumper off, besides every single pedagogical and curriculum decision that day. And it's exhausting. And as leaders, you might only make 300 decisions a day, but they are big decisions that can impact on people's careers, that can impact on the reputation of your school, that can impact on student learning. And there's this real risk management, weighing up decision making that is going on all the time in your head. And so while there are the risk management decisions, there are a whole lot of prioritization decisions. And when you're holding your bucket full of holes, it's helpful to be really clear about the decisions that need to be made by who and when. And again, my coaching clients will come to me with this really big, complicated problem. And I will say, what is the decision that needs to be made? And quite often they will actually know what it is, but they need permission to say it out loud. So the question is, what is the problem and what is the decision that needs to be made? Is it my role to make that decision, or am I solving a problem that actually belongs to somebody else? Quite often we worry about decisions that aren't ours to worry about. If we have really clear structures and decision-making processes in schools, that decision may in fact belong to somebody else, and your job is to coach them into making that decision. But importantly, we need to know, do we have the information that I need to make a decision? Have I gathered that information? Or am I going off half-cocked? Maybe I only have some of the information. Now, this can tie us down sometimes. You'll never have all of the information, but have you considered other perspectives, other options, other alternatives, other people's opinions? And then, are you more likely to be analytical, literally weigh those up, or you're more likely to go with your gut? Again, not bad or good. We need to get a balance, but it's absolutely okay sometimes to weigh up all the perspectives and go with your gut. And that is called being professional. And again, it's also completely all right to put all of that information into a hypothetical spreadsheet and make a decision based on that. If there is a risk assessment that needs to be undertaken, have you done it? And so risk assessment is just really briefly the likelihood of something that's going to occur and the impact that's it's going to have. So some things are very likely to happen, but will have minimal impact. Whereas other things are very unlikely to happen, but have massive impact. So a fire at your school is very unlikely to happen, but is potential to have massive impact. Whereas an angry parent is very likely to happen. And most of the time, the impact of that is relatively small. So understanding, having a process for a risk assessment is really important, because not everything is a fire, not everything is a calamity. And if you are used to making decisions based on adrenaline, you won't have taken that risk assessment, and you'll be running around like henny penny with the sky falling in. Importantly, in schools, you need to be very clear with your teachers and your teams, and even your leadership team, if you've got one, about whether this decision is collaborative. So we are going to work together, brainstorm options, and make a collaborative decision using a collaborative decision-making structure. Or whether it's consultative. I am going to ask your opinion, and then I'm going to go away and make a decision either on my own or with a group of people who are tasked to do that. So, so we might ask everybody's opinion about a literacy strategy, and then we might bring it to the literacy committee, and it might be their job to make the decision. But there are also other decisions that are yours to make and yours to make alone. And one of the biggest problems in schools is when people aren't clear about whether the decision is, whether their opinion is going to be part of a collaborative or a consultative process, or whether it's just you gathering information. Importantly, it's really useful to know what the risk of not making a decision is, or taking too long. It's getting the balance right. Do I act really quickly, knowing that I might not have all of the information, or do I take too long and then at the risk of not making a decision, get decision paralysis and maybe also disenfranchise people? Importantly, policy is your friend when making decisions. And so if you have a clear policy, a framework, a flowchart, or a process that you can go back to, that will guide your decision. So if you can say it was agreed in this school that we would do X, Y, and Z, and you can find this in the curriculum policy, or we're a PBS school, and so we need to have ensured that we go through the tiers, then that is always a really good option. And so if you're finding yourself having to make the same decisions over and over again, you might want to think about a way to streamline that. And all good decisions are values-based decisions. Am I making this in alignment with the school's values or my own personal values? Is it meeting the mission or the vision of the school? Or am I just making this up as I go along? Righto. The last one is organisation. And maybe the bucket that your problem belongs in is actually organisation. You would be surprised how often my coaching clients will come to me with an enormous challenge around, I can't get along with my team member and they're being really difficult, and I said and we said, and they will come to you with a long story that sounds like it's a relationship problem. When in fact, when it all boils down, it's actually about communication, planning, organisation, or time management, and it belongs in the organisational bucket. Just two things. Productivity and accountability go hand in hand and can be summed up by the question, am I or are we using our time productively to meet the goals of the organisation? So are we using our time productively? Are we organised to meet the goals of the organisation? But here's the thing, we all know that a lack of organisation can prevent a job being done, but so too can perfectionism. Relying too much on a rigid, well-planned strategy does not allow for flexibility. Insistence on following the process or only speaking to me if your name's in my diary can stifle creativity and can lead to compliance rather than commitment. So here are some questions you might want to ask yourself to see if it fits into the organisational bucket. Am I super clear about the best use of my time and my team's time to meet the school's goals? These are the big rocks. What are the ways that we can spend our time to make sure that we hit our targets, our big rocks? Do I model these? Am I doing this? And am I communicating these priorities? Are there policies and frameworks to guide others? This to me reminds me a little bit about the hidden curriculum or the hidden culture. Often people will espouse that this is really important in our school, but they will model something completely different. And so this might just be upfront and say, these are my priorities for this term. I'm going to build a relationship with the early childhood parents and team, and I'm going to be making sure I get to classrooms looking at our literacy strategy. Then, do I have systems to manage my own time and priorities? These might be calendars and diaries and systems for getting meeting requests and understanding about how to communicate. And so it might use things like Microsoft Teams or whatever the technology is. And in fact, am I using technology to really turbocharge my productivity? Then, is there flexibility in my timetable for those left of field events? And how do I make a decision about whether I'm going to not do what I planned to do that left of field event? Do I quarantine time for deep strategic thinking? That's that deep work, the strategic work. Do I give myself time to do that? And do I let people know that that's what I'm doing and wherever possible it needs to be uninterrupted? But importantly, do people know who to turn to for advice and information? If people want information, are they all coming to you, or is there a process, a place, a clear flowchart for communication and support? And this often involves organising your leadership team and your flow of communication really well. So being really clear about what everybody in the organisational chart is responsible for and giving them permission to own and be responsible for that, so people aren't coming to you all the time for the information that they need. So is there a clear flow chart? Do meetings have a clear purpose and agenda? Are repetitive tasks for everybody in your leadership team, but also your teachers, are they automated as much as possible so that we are not reinventing the wheel? In terms of organisation, do I ensure a balance between relationships, people, and tasks, or do I tend to prefer one over the other? We all know people that spend every minute of their day in their office and they never get to see the people, and other people who would really prefer to be out walking around, meeting and greeting, but they don't get the tasks done. There's a lot to organisation, and in the collective every week 3, I make sure that you have some tools that you might not have considered that will help you out. But the RIDO scale, I hope that you can use it. Just keep it in your brain as you are balancing your buckets that have holes in them, and say to myself, is this a relationship bucket? Is this an information bucket? Is this a decision I need to make? Or is there something around my organisation that needs to be tweaked here? I hope you found that useful.